Episode 3, The Princess and the Hound. I no longer have anyone waiting for me in England. I am alone. I hope that sooner or later this sense of emptiness will leave me. It is 1973. The Prince of Wales is 25 years old. He is sitting at the small desk in his cabin, aboard a Royal Navy frigate, in the middle of the Caribbean Sea and on a mission that would last 8 months. He is writing a letter to his mentor, his great-uncle Lord Mountbatten, the only one in the family with whom he could confide in matters of heart. The young second lieutenant has sunk into an abyss and is unable to find peace. He has just discovered that the woman he is madly in love with will marry another, Andrew Parker Bowles, a brilliant British Army officer. Charles knew him well. He had been a page boy at his mother's coronation, played on the same polo team as hers, and even more so, until recently, dated his sister. And it is precisely on the sidelines of a polo match that he met Camilla in passing. The spark, however, is triggered during a party organised by his first flame, Lucia Santa Cruz, daughter of the Chilean ambassador in London. At the time, the heir to the throne was considered the most coveted bachelor in the world, and even a sex symbol, despite his somewhat plastered style. He had his rampant years. Charles was intent on following his great-uncle's advice to the letter. Before marrying a girl with no past, you must sow wild oats. This was a very British way of urging him to have as many sexual adventures as possible. According to the chronicles of the time, under the covers, Charles knew what he wanted, and what he was doing. In short, he knew how to do it. She, Camilla Rosemary Shand, was witty, self-confident and with a disruptive personality. She was born to live in society and raised in the wealthy English countryside. She was the daughter of Bruce Shand, a highly decorated war hero, and of Rosalind Cubitt, who in 1939 was Rookie of the Year and could count on excellent acquaintances in the British upper class, starting with George VI, Charles's grandfather. According to Lucia Santa Cruz, it would have been a match made in heaven. My great-grandmother was the mistress of your great-great-grandfather. I feel we have something in common. This was Camilla's cheeky debut at the beginning of the evening. She was looking him straight in the eyes, with a half-smile and a goblet in her hand. Charles, back to the wall, was transfixed. The two met for a couple of years, assiduously, despite the fact that she was engaged, in a relationship on and off with what would later become her first husband. According to friends at the time, the two were perfect for each other. Same interests, great complicity, and a chemistry that the court playboy would never find with anyone else. And a chemistry that the court playboy would never find with anyone else. For Charles, Camilla was pure gold. She was the only one who seemed able to understand him, the one with whom to have that emotional exchange that he had always longed for from his mother, the only one who knew how to treat him without reverence, or without prejudice. And then, so damn passionate and witty. In short, his ideal woman. And yet, the love between Gladys and Fred, as they called each other, had to surrender to an adage as atavistic as power. When it comes to royal marriage, love is not enough. There are those who say it was Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, who pushed the Spencer sisters next to Charles. There are those who say it was his mother, Queen Elizabeth, according to whom Camilla was too free and uninhibited for her son. On the other hand, there are those who argue that Lord Mountbatten was behind the decision to send Charles on a mission 5,000 kilometres from London, who was himself intent on exploiting his ascendancy over Charles to make him marry his niece Amanda. The fact is that, for the crown, Camilla had to be removed from the hopes of the young prince, away from his eyes, away from his heart. And now, sitting at that desk in the middle of the sea, Between the lines of frustration he knew well, our Romeo feels alone, adrift in a stormy sea, afflicted by a sense of emptiness that, no, would not have left him. You looked so sad, walking down the aisle during the funeral. It was the most tragic thing I have ever seen. You looked so alone. You should have someone around you. It is the summer of 1980. A few months have passed since the death of great-uncle Lord Mountbatten, killed in an attack at the hands of the IRA, the Northern Irish independent activists. A very hard blow, a thought that keeps coming back to Charles's head, even now, that he is sitting on a bale of hay on a summer evening during a party in the countryside. The compassionate voice beside him is that of Diana Spencer. The two have already met, but in passing. Charles had dated her older sister Sarah a few years earlier, but it didn't go anywhere. The prince is under pressure. Time is passing. At 32, he is no longer a boy, and it is time to get married, but none of the numerous suitors seem to want to accept the responsibilities of life in the palace. Diana is almost 19, a kindergarten teacher, and lives in South Kensington. She is beautiful, although her tomboy look does not enhance her femininity. She is very sweet and has a sincere interest in Charles. Charles, sitting on that bale of hay, feels touched by the sweetness of the words of the very young Lady Spencer. It was the first kiss, but it wasn't love at first sight. On the contrary, the difference in age, interests, and cultural baggage represented a considerable obstacle for Charles, and it took his father's Philip ultimatum to convince him to propose. The British public played a crucial role in putting pressure on young Charles's shoulders. The public fell in love with Diana's freshness from the moment photos were published of her in the Sun, as she held two small children in her arms outside the nursery school where she worked. She wore a floral skirt and she had a shy expression, with photographs capturing her chaste charm. Charles knew that the line of succession had to be ensured, and all in all, Diana was the ideal candidate. Young, aristocratic, without scandals behind her and with genuine manners, but above all, without a past, unsullied. The perfect princess. The thought that the Prince of Wales was still linked to Camilla seemed a completely negligible detail for the crown. After all, over the centuries, arranged marriages or marriages of convenience have been the basis of the survival of kingdoms and houses. But certainly not for Charles, who convinced himself to do the right thing for the country and for the family. Only after a sleepless night, the night before the wedding, Diana could also not sleep. A few hours earlier, she had found in her future husband's drawer a bracelet with two initials, F and G, Fred and Gladys. Diana spent the night before her wedding on the phone with her friends, in tears and despair. She was convinced it was all a mistake, a resounding, damned mistake. Have patience, it will pass. History is on your side, she heard herself say. It is with these premises that, in the summer of 1981, after only 13 appointments, one of the most awaited events of the 20th century was held. Charles and Diana were declared husband and wife in front of 750 million people around the world. In public, their tale marked the beginning of a new golden age for the monarchy. But in private, things had already gone terribly bad. Charles, raised in an environment where feelings and emotions had to be set aside, and were often considered a weakness, immediately proved unable to provide Diana with the affection and support she needed. During the honeymoon spent aboard the Britannia, the family yacht, Charles brought with him 7 volumes written by his friend Vanderpost. He read almost all of them. When he wasn't reading, he painted watercolours or contemplated the horizon. One of the most cynical, but perhaps most apt readings, is provided in the book Battle of the Brothers by Robert Lacey, according to which the Prince of Wales considered marriage essentially a business proposition, about succession not about love. In 2021, 40 years after the famous interview given by the couple on the occasion of their engagement, in which Charles, smiling, said, "I'm very much in love, whatever love means," an unedited video is published. For the first time, Diana's expression is visible at those words spoken by her future husband. It's a few interminable seconds. Diana purses her lips, looks down, then to the side, then looks up, lost at the journalist's question. Her romantic and idolised vision of happy marriage had already collapsed, even before it materialised. For her part, Diana, who, as her friends revealed years later, was perhaps more in love with the idea of becoming a princess than with Charles, immediately found herself submerged by a reality greater than her, and bent under the weight of a life at court that can be ruthless even before alienating. She soon found herself suffering from mood swings, anxiety crisis, and bouts of bulimia. For her, the rules and rituals of the court were meaningless, if not suffocating, to say the least. And at her side, she found a man she did not know, who in turn was at the mercy of an institution against which she did not know and against which he wanted to rebel. In all of this, in the background, Camilla's ghost continued to materialise. Years later, Diana confessed that she felt like a sacrificial lamb at the time, from the first signs of an incurable rift, passing through the open secret of a crowded marriage, up to the tragic epilogue of Lady D's life. All aspects have been written, produced, and discussed. The tragedy that plunged the country into a state of collective shock was not only the most difficult moment for Charles, for his two sons, and for the monarchy, but it was also the moment in which, in the collective imagination, the stigma on Charles's forehead became indelible. As they say, in every story there must be a villain, otherwise the hero cannot shine. And so it has always been. It is the principle that underlies any story, and this one was no exception. Author of her unhappiness, her illness, and now even her death, Charles was eclipsed for a long time by the image that Diana had skillfully projected on a planetary scale. The printed paper was lined up compactly on her side. And how could it be otherwise? A young and beautiful princess, always at the side of the needy, including AIDS patients, orphans, and children who were victims of war. The more she pervaded people's daily lives and proved to be close to ordinary people, the more distant and detached he appeared, committed to fighting for issues considered secondary, such as the fight against climate change, or, worse, involved in sordid scandals, such as when, in January of '93, a red light phone call was published with Camilla, which went down in history as Tampongate, on whose details we prefer to draw a pitiful veil. There are those who argue, not without deep cynicism, that Diana's death was a salvation for the monarchy. The superstar princess, capable of approaching Mother Teresa of Calcutta, would have only over time eclipsed Elizabeth, and certainly also her son Charles. Against him, Diana had already won the media war, hands down. As in November 1992, on the occasion of Charles's 44th birthday, Diana flew to Paris and visited then-President François Mitterrand and his wife Danielle, alone. 40 minutes of bilateral, if we can call it that. Vanity Fair wrote, "For Diana, it was a moment of triumph. For Prince Charles, it was a crushing defeat, which could ultimately cost him the throne. And now, he is in danger of being completely eclipsed." Others, on the other hand, believe, with equal cynicism, that Diana's sudden death has forever crystallised the myth of her figure, saving it from the transience of time. Today, even the most intransigent critics are inclined to define the marriage between Charles and Diana simply for what it was: a wrong union between two incompatible people who did not understand each other and who were unable to help each other. Ahistorical revisionism on the responsibilities of an announced failure that managed to find a completely unthinkable balance during the so-called Battle of Wales, or in the years following the crash under the Alma Tunnel. Yet, inevitably, for many, this reading is still on the verge of hearsay. The image of Diana is still there, young and beautiful, but above all considered by many as the lamb sacrificed on the altar of the monarchy. Social climber, cold calculator, home-wrecking hag. If already, during the crisis between Charles and Diana, Camilla was badly tolerated, after the tragic accident in Paris, she became public enemy number one. During a televised debate on the future of the monarchy in the late 1990s, whenever anyone mentioned her name, there were boos and whoops of disapproval from the audience. On one occasion, in the parking lot of a supermarket, bread rolls were pelted at her, while several newspapers were forced to go to the police due to the number of insulting letters they received, all directed at her, Camilla Parker Bowles. Every story needs a villain, remember. If in the eyes of public opinion, Charles was the villain, Camilla was considered the reason for all evils. One of her sweetest nicknames was Rottweiler, first given to her by Diana. The Queen, having come to the conclusion that Camilla would not leave, decided that she might as well welcome her, planning an impossible mission. Something had to be done. Charles's face had to be saved and the monarchy's dignity restored. The PB, Parker Bowles Operation, was entrusted to Mark Bollard, Clarence House's new communications manager, according to whom the strategy to be adopted was to remove Camilla from behind the scenes and bring her into the limelight, but without haste, in perfect royal style. The first official engagement together came 2 years later at the Ritz in London. Then the first kisses in public, finally the holidays with William and Harry. The strategy worked, and 20 years after their first meeting, clandestine love came out. With the approval of the press, the government, and even public opinion. In that period, Charles seemed reborn, smiling and witty again, like he hadn't been for years. Yet there was still something missing. There was still a very distant sense of emptiness and injustice that he had been carrying around for some time. He still felt compelled to do one more thing. He had to marry Camilla. Needless to say, the idea of a future adulterous Anglican church leader remarrying, moreover to a divorced woman, would have made the most radical of priests and the most flexible of constitutionalists stand on end. Not to mention the good soul of King Edward VIII, Elizabeth's uncle, who abdicated to marry the divorced actress Wallis Simpson and spent a lifetime in exile. It took the intervention of the Archbishop of Canterbury, on gentle pressure from Elizabeth II, to make the wedding possible, which was even postponed for a day to allow Charles to fly to the Vatican and represent the Anglican Church at the funeral of Pope John Paul II. And so, despite the obstacles and bad timing, Charles and Camilla got married on April the 9th, 2005. The rehabilitation of Camilla Parker Bowles certainly represented one of the most important steps in the process of bringing Charles closer to the throne. It was Elizabeth herself who consecrated him, crowning her queen consort on the occasion of her 30 years of reign, recognising the importance that Camilla has had on the crown in recent years, the same she has always shown for her beloved Charles. Because, for better or worse, Camilla has supported Charles in all public and private activities. She has always known his strengths and his insecurities. But, above all, she is the only person with whom the king can be himself. An indissoluble bond, stronger than reasons of state. An invisible thread to everyone, except Charles. Ever since that evening when, during a party, they realised they have something in common.